I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I'd seen it in movies, heard the stories. I even read the books. But when it happens to you, it's nothing like what they tell you. It's not the screaming matches or the slow build-up to the revelation. It's more like a small crack, a tiny chip in the perfect surface of your life. And then one day, you're standing there, and the whole thing is crumbling before your eyes, and you didn't even see it coming. I first noticed the text late one night. It was subtle at first, a name I didn't recognize on Emily's phone screen. Jason Hart. I didn't know him, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to. Emily had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she stepped into the living room. The message popped up, glowing in the dark. See you tonight, Jay, dinner at 8. I didn't immediately pick up the phone. That would have been too obvious. I wasn't about to confront her on the spot, but I couldn't focus on anything after that. The knot in my stomach tightened. The name kept echoing in my mind, louder than the hum of the refrigerator. I let the moment pass. I went about my evening, pretending everything was fine, acting like the perfect husband. But inside, my mind was racing. Who is Jason Hart? Why does she think I won't notice? The next few days, I paid more attention than usual, watching for any slip-ups. It wasn't the first time I'd felt something was off, but it was the first time I had real evidence in my hands. She had always been a little distant, but that wasn't unusual. Emily was an actress, always busy with auditions, acting classes, and the occasional small role she still managed to land. I'd gotten used to it over the years, but now it was different. I started noticing little things. The way she'd smile at her phone, almost too knowingly. The late nights out. The way she'd act like nothing was wrong when I asked where she was. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I knew better than to go off gut feelings. I had a job to do. I would figure this out, thoroughly and meticulously. The next evening, after I had seen her texting Jason again, I decided it was time to start gathering real evidence. I didn't just want to confront her without knowing everything. No, I would be smarter about this. I wasn't just any husband, I was a lawyer, and I knew how to gather facts. I hired a private investigator. Edward had worked with me before on a few smaller cases. He was quiet, discreet, and knew how to keep his distance. I trusted him to find the truth. It was time to stop wondering. I was going to expose her. And when I did, it would be her who had no ground to stand on. I knew what I had to do. Gathering evidence wasn't just a matter of ego or pride. It was necessary. If I was going to bring down the woman I had married, the mother of my son, it had to be done right. I couldn't afford to get emotional or reckless. Every move had to be calculated. Every step had to be deliberate. So I called Edward. Edward was the kind of man who could get in and out of places unnoticed, who could tail someone without raising an eyebrow. He was reliable, a little rough around the edges, but always professional when it came to his job. That's what I needed now. A professional. Someone who wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't push me for details. He understood that the less he knew, the better. Edward, I need you to follow my wife. I could hear the smile in his voice, even over the phone. Another cheater, huh? What's her name? Emily, I said, avoiding the bitterness that wanted to seep into my words. She's involved with someone. I need to know who, when, where. Got it. I'll need a week. I'll let you know if anything turns up. A week felt like an eternity, but I couldn't rush this. I spent the following days obsessing over every moment with Emily. Every smile, every glance, every touch. The more I watched her, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on everything. Was this the woman I had built my life with? Was this the woman who had promised to love me for better or worse? The truth was a shadow hanging over every interaction we had, and every time I reached for her, it felt like I was grasping at air. Edward's updates came slowly at first, just brief texts or quick calls with vague details. She was meeting Jason again. Dinner, drinks, whatever it was. They were spending time together. It wasn't until the fourth day that I started getting real information. She's been to his apartment twice this week, Edward told me one evening. She stays for a couple hours each time. No one else around. I clenched my fist around the phone, my pulse quickening. It wasn't a huge revelation. I had suspected it. But hearing the confirmation, knowing that she was making no attempt to hide it, made my blood run cold. But it was what Edward told me next that really stopped me dead in my tracks. She left something behind last night, he said. A jacket. Red leather. Jason's place. My mind reeled. I didn't need to ask how he knew it was hers. He'd probably seen the name tag inside the jacket. Emily's initials in fine embroidery. I had to bite my tongue, remind myself that this was the job I'd set out to do. This was business. Good work, I said, pushing the anger down into the pit of my stomach. Keep following them. I'll need pictures. I'll need proof of everything. Edward was already ahead of me. He had a plan to get those pictures, and I trusted him to get the job done. The next few days blurred together. My mind was constantly racing through the possible consequences of what I was about to do. But there was no going back now. She had crossed the line, and she needed to be held accountable for it. Meanwhile, Emily had no idea what was coming. She was still playing the perfect wife, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I watched her from the corner of my eye, wondering if she could tell I was onto her. Did she suspect? Did she know that I had hired someone to watch her every move? I don't know why I thought she might feel guilty. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer. But I wasn't going to be the one who let her win. I would get my answers. I would get everything I needed to make sure that this didn't just destroy her. It would destroy her completely. I spent the next few days waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Edward's updates were starting to feel like a slow drip of confirmation, each one more damning than the last. But it wasn't enough yet. I needed everything, every piece, before I could act. The real breakthrough came late on the 6th day. I was sitting at my desk, buried in paperwork, when my phone buzzed. Edward's name flashed on the screen. My pulse quickened. "Got something for you," he said, his voice flat, the tone telling me he knew the weight of the information he was about to share. "What is it?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I have photos of her at Jason's apartment, just like I said. But there's more." He paused, as if letting the silence drag out for a reason. "I followed her to a hotel last night. She met him there. Stayed the night. Left early this morning." I let the words sink in slowly, my hands gripping the edges of my desk, my nails digging into the wood. I could feel the cold certainty setting in, like a wave crashing over me. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I wouldn't. "I need those photos," I said through gritted teeth. "Already sent them. You'll have the full set by tonight." By the time I hung up, I had already begun planning. The truth was no longer a vague idea. It was real, tangible. My wife had been sleeping with another man for months, maybe longer. There was no question anymore. I had what I needed. The next few hours were a blur. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the photos Edward had sent. There was Emily, laughing with him. Jason Hart, the actor I had never heard of until all of this began. There they were again, kissing in the hotel lobby, the second photo catching them mid-embrace, her hands tangled in his hair. Every image, every frame, was another dagger in my chest. But I wasn't about to let myself break. No, this was it. This was the moment where I would take control. This was where the plan began. I wasn't angry. Not yet, anyway. The anger would come later, when I had the upper hand. Right now, I was focused on the future. And Emily. She had no idea how badly she was about to lose. That night, I took a long walk around the neighborhood, the cool air clearing my head. I needed space to think. I needed a moment where my mind wasn't racing with images of Emily and Jason. The wind bit at my face as I walked along the lakefront, the city lights casting reflections in the water. I let the silence wash over me, gathering my thoughts, my next steps. I'd always prided myself on being a patient man, a calculated one. This was no different. I was a lawyer, after all. And now I was going to use everything I knew, every tactic, every strategy, to dismantle the life she had built. I would use her own deceit against her. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. That would come later. First, I needed to set the stage. I started putting together a list of everything I would need to take her down. Divorce papers, custody forms, evidence of her betrayal, yes, but also the financial leverage, the emotional instability, the fact that she'd chosen this affair over her family. I was going to make sure she lost everything, her career, her reputation, her standing. And most importantly, I was going to make sure she lost Michael. This was no longer about betrayal. This was about justice. The next morning, I ordered a paternity test. Michael, my son, had to be a part of the equation too. I needed absolute certainty about his parentage. I wasn't about to let Emily question that. And if I was going to win full custody, I couldn't afford any holes in my case. I didn't tell her about it. There was no reason to. At this stage, it was just another piece of the puzzle that would eventually fall into place. Every move, every step was deliberate, planned for maximum impact. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. If she thought she could hide behind her charm and her career, she was wrong. I knew there was still a long road ahead of me. This was just the beginning. But the way I saw it, I had already won. It was only a matter of time before the truth would catch up to her. And when it did, there would be no escape. I had the evidence, the photos, the confirmation of the affair, but now came the hard part, the part where I needed to make it count. It wasn't just about exposing Emily's infidelity, it was about making her pay for it. And in my world, the world of law, I knew exactly how to do that. First, I met with my lawyer, Jack McAllister. Jack was a bulldog, sharp, precise, and never afraid to fight dirty. He was exactly the kind of ally I needed for this. I laid out everything for him. The photos, the details from Edward, and the fact that Emily had been living a double life for months. Jack studied the documents and leaned back in his chair. "You've got a solid case here, Daniel. But you want to make sure she loses big, right? Not just the affair, her whole life. Her career, her reputation." I nodded. "I'm not in this to play nice. I want full custody of Michael, and I want her to lose everything she's built." Jack smiled, a cold grin that made me feel a little better. "Good. We'll make sure we hit her where it hurts the most. Emotionally, financially, professionally. We'll leverage everything we can." The strategy was clear from the beginning. First, the divorce. We'd file it as soon as possible, citing her emotional instability and the irreparable harm she had caused to the family. It wasn't just about her affair. It was about how it had affected Michael, how her behavior had undermined the family unit. Next, we'd demand full custody of Michael. We had the affair as a foundation, but I wanted to pile on the rest. Emily's volatile career, the late nights out, the instability of her lifestyle. All of it painted a picture of someone unfit to raise a child. But there was more. The real punch came from Emily's career, or what was left of it. She'd been struggling for years to find meaningful roles after her brief, failed stint as a TV actress. It had been obvious from the beginning that her acting career had always been about building an image, not about real talent. I knew the industry better than anyone, and I wasn't about to let her get away with hiding behind her acting skills. If I could find a way to leverage her competitors and make sure she never worked again, I would. The next few days were spent gathering documents, working with Jack to fine-tune the divorce papers and custody requests. We strategized how to paint Emily as emotionally unstable, how her obsession with her image and her career had consumed her, making her unfit to care for Michael. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. That was just the tip of the iceberg. No, this was about breaking her down completely, making sure there was nothing left to salvage. But there was still the matter of the paternity test. I hadn't told Emily about it yet. I wasn't sure when the right moment would come, if there even was a right moment. The test results would confirm what I already knew. Michael was my son. But in the event that Emily tried to dispute it, I wanted to be armed with the truth, ready to slam her down with evidence. I began to think more about Michael. How was this going to affect him? It was hard to ignore the pain I felt when I thought about him caught in the middle of all this. He was 5, just beginning to form real memories of his parents. I'd always done my best to be there for him, to be the father he needed. But the more I thought about the situation, the more I realized that this was something I had to do for him. He couldn't grow up in a household like this, where lies, betrayal, and secrets hung in the air. He deserved better. He deserved stability. And as hard as it was to admit, Emily couldn't give him that. I didn't talk to Emily much during those days. I didn't need to. She was still playing her role, pretending everything was fine. But I knew what was coming, and I couldn't let her pretend anymore. When I did see her, it was only in passing, when I was coming home late or leaving early. She never questioned it, never thought twice about why I was acting different. She didn't know I was planning her downfall. I didn't tell her about the divorce papers. I didn't tell her about the paternity test. The last thing I needed was for her to start covering her tracks before it was too late. But all of that was about to change. Once the divorce was filed, once everything was set in motion, she wouldn't be able to hide from the truth. A week later, Jack and I were ready. The papers were filed. The paternity test had come back confirming what I already knew, and I had all the ammunition I needed to make sure Emily lost everything. It was time to move forward. The day the divorce papers were filed, I felt a strange sense of detachment. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that the next phase of my life had started. The emails had been sent, the forms signed, the documents served. Emily had no idea what was coming for her. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I didn't need to. I'd done what I had to do. Now, it was all about letting the system work its magic. And with the leverage I had, I knew it would work in my favor. The next morning, the phone calls started. First, it was Jack calling to check in. The court's already moving forward with the custody request. He told me, "I've got a meeting with the judge in 2 days. It's looking good." I didn't say much. There was no need for small talk. I just nodded and hung up, the weight of the next steps pressing down on me. This was going to be quick, swift, and I was ready for it. When I saw Emily that evening, she didn't bring up the divorce papers. She didn't even look at me. She was too preoccupied with her own world, her own distractions. I could hear her talking on the phone as I walked past her in the hallway, making arrangements for her next audition. I didn't need to listen to her words. I knew what was being said. It was always the same. She'd get a call. A casting director would offer her a role. Nothing significant, but enough to keep her busy. Her career was a facade, built on carefully constructed images, not on talent. It was all about looking the part, playing the game. I knew that, and I knew I could destroy it. Later that week, I went to the local coffee shop near her acting agency. I'd been doing some research on her competitors, gathering intel. It didn't take long to find out which names were the real threats to her career. These were the people she had once competed with, the ones who had always overshadowed her. They had the roles she wanted, the recognition she craved. And I knew just how to use them. I made a few calls to contacts in the industry, speaking to agents, casting directors, and producers. It was enough to drop hints, to sow seeds of doubt. A word here, a whisper there. Let them know she was unstable, unreliable. Let them know about the affair. Let them know she couldn't be trusted with the commitment needed to hold down a serious role. By the end of the week, her name was already being passed over for roles. Agents stopped calling. Casting directors hesitated when they saw her name on a list. Emily's phone stopped buzzing. The work dried up. It was as if her career had been cut off at the knees. I checked my phone again, making sure everything was falling into place. I had gotten her competitors on board, not that they needed much convincing. They'd heard the whispers, the stories. They'd seen the slow decline of her career. All I had to do was push it over the edge. The next move was crucial. Once I hit her career, I had to go after the public perception. I had to make sure she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. I turned to social media. I knew how the game worked. I knew the power of a well-placed tweet, the ripple effect of a viral video. The first thing I did was create an anonymous account. I knew the public was already hungry for drama, and I had plenty of it to serve. It was easy to plant a few details here and there, carefully crafting a story of Emily's infidelity, her emotional instability, her recklessness. A few strategically timed posts about the troubled marriage between her and me. Another about Jason Hart, the actor who'd been having an affair with her. It didn't take long for people to take notice. Once the media got wind of the story, they ran with it. Headlines, interviews, tweets. Everything I planted started to bloom. That evening, Emily stormed into the living room, her face flushed with frustration. Her hands were shaking as she held her phone, glaring at it like it had personally betrayed her. "How is this happening?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How could anyone be spreading this crap about me?" I didn't say anything. I just watched as she paced back and forth. Her breath ragged with the shock of it all. "I'm going to sue," she snapped, stopping in front of me, her eyes wide with anger. "Someone's going to pay for this." I could barely contain the grin tugging at the corner of my lips. She was right. Someone was going to pay. But it wouldn't be me. It would be her. "Emily," I said, my voice as calm as I could make it, "I don't think you understand how deep this goes." She froze, the fury draining from her face as she processed my words. She knew. Deep down, she knew I had control of the situation now. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The public was turning on her. Her career was slipping away. And soon enough, the court would hand me custody of Michael. The next morning, the media storm picked up pace. Articles were written about her affair, about her failed career, about her instability as a mother. I wasn't the one writing them, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Emily's calls to her agent went unanswered. She paced the house, her steps erratic, her voice breaking as she tried to make sense of everything. She had no idea what was coming next. I woke up to a storm. Emily's phone had been blowing up all night, and when I glanced at it, the notifications were all the same. Outlets covering her affair, her emotional instability, and her ruined career. The world was turning against her, and there was nothing she could do but watch it happen. As I sipped my coffee, I watched the chaos unfold. Emily had tried to spin it, of course, blaming the media, claiming that the stories were lies. But the public was already too invested. The videos, the articles, the social media posts, they'd spread like wildfire. Her career was over before she even had a chance to fight back. By the time she finally approached me, her face pale and her eyes hollow with exhaustion, I had already made my next move. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to stop this. This isn't helping anyone." I glanced up from the papers I was reviewing. "What do you want me to do, Emily? Pretend I didn't see what you did. Pretend this isn't who you are." She flinched, a wave of guilt flashing across her face before it was quickly masked by anger. "You've made your point. You've ruined my life. What more do you want?" I set the papers aside. "I want full custody of Michael," I said evenly. "And I'm going to make sure you never work again." The truth hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She couldn't even argue. Not anymore. "I'll fight you in court," she said finally, but the fight in her was gone. She knew she couldn't win. The evidence I had, her affair, her inability to provide a stable environment for Michael, was undeniable. She had no defense. I didn't need to say much more. I'd already won. The next few days felt like a blur of court filings and press conferences. The final hearing was looming, and I knew Emily was too weak to mount any real opposition. She still tried to hold on to the hope that somehow someone would believe her version of the story. But the truth had already been laid bare for all to see. In court, Emily barely spoke. She looked defeated, her usual sharpness gone. She didn't try to defend herself when Jack laid out the case. The affair was brought up, the damage it had caused to Michael, and her emotional instability. All of it was on the table. I didn't need to say a word. Jack handled everything. When it came time for the judge to deliver the verdict, the silence in the room was thick. The judge spoke with authority, outlining the reasons why Michael needed a stable home environment. I could feel Emily's eyes on me as the words were read. Daniel Watson is granted full custody of Michael Watson. Emily Watson's visitation rights are to be determined at a later date. Emily's face went pale, and she didn't react. There was nothing left to fight for. It was done. I had Michael, and I knew I'd given him the best chance at a future that didn't involve the mess of Emily's life. I focused on the weeks that followed, settling in with Michael, making sure he felt safe. I didn't rush him. He was adjusting, just like I was. The world had changed, and it was hard for both of us to accept. But it was for the best. Emily disappeared after that. There were rumors, of course. She moved to LA to start over, but no one really cared anymore. The actress who had once had it all was now just another name in the headlines, one of many that would fade into obscurity. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel triumph. There was only relief. I had my son. I had a future ahead of me. The days after the court hearing felt like a long exhale, a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. It was over. Emily was gone. I had Michael. And that was all that mattered. But even though the war had ended, the rebuilding was just beginning. Michael was quiet at first. He didn't speak much about his mother, and I didn't push him to. He was still processing everything, and so was I. It was hard to reconcile the father who had raised him with the man who had just torn his family apart. But I couldn't afford to look back, not now. I had to focus on the present, on what we both needed. I had to get my life back on track. I'd been so consumed with the fight that I hadn't realized how much I'd lost along the way. My peace, my energy, even my passion for law. I still worked, of course. I had clients to meet, cases to win, but it was different now. Everything felt more distant, like I was going through the motions, rather than truly living. I enrolled Michael in a new school, one closer to the apartment we'd settled into. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. But it was ours. I made sure it was a place he could call home. And I started to get back into my routine. The gym, the office, the few friends who hadn't distanced themselves. Life started to fall back into some semblance of order. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, a message came through from Jack. "I've been doing some digging," it said. "I think we've got something else on Emily. Something big." At first, I was tempted to ignore it. I'd already won. Emily was out of our lives, and I had no interest in kicking a woman who was already down. But curiosity gnawed at me. I replied, "What is it?" Jack's response came quickly. "I'll meet you tonight." That evening, I met Jack at a small bar near the office. He was already seated, a beer in hand, waiting for me. "I think Emily's back in the game," Jack said without preamble. "I've been talking to some sources in LA. She's trying to make a comeback. But there's something else, something you should know." I frowned. "What is it?" Jack leaned in, lowering his voice. "She's been reaching out to some of the people we used to work with. Old contacts. She's trying to get back in the industry. But I don't think it's for the right reasons." I sat back, processing the information. "What are you saying?" Jack's eyes met mine, sharp and direct. "I think she's plotting something. And I don't think she's done with you. Or Michael." The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had won the custody battle, but Emily hadn't given up. I could feel the gears turning in my head. The fact that she was already trying to re-enter the industry, despite the damage she'd caused, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't done trying to take back control. The next few days were spent strategizing. I couldn't let my guard down. Not yet. I knew Emily's type. She wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. I had to make sure she didn't get any opportunities to drag Michael back into her mess. I called in a few favors from old colleagues, people who still had ties to the industry. I needed to know everything she was doing. I needed to be one step ahead of her. But something inside me also shifted. For the first time in a long time, I started to question the path I'd chosen. It had been so easy to turn the law into a weapon, so easy to manipulate the system to my advantage. I had done everything by the book, but I couldn't ignore the fact that I'd destroyed a person in the process. And even though I had Michael, even though I had won, I couldn't help but wonder if the cost had been too high. That night, after I put Michael to bed, I sat alone in the quiet apartment, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. The lights flickered below, and the city seemed so distant, like a world I had once been part of, but no longer belonged to. I wondered what would happen when Emily came back. What would she do next? And what would I do then? It had been a month since Jack's warning, and Emily's movements were still a mystery. No surprise there. She was never one to play her cards openly. Instead, she worked in the shadows, setting the stage for her comeback. I felt like I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing she would find some way to complicate things. But I couldn't let myself be consumed by her anymore. Still, the unsettling feeling lingered. Every time I picked up Michael from school, I checked the surroundings. Every call I received made me hesitate for a split second, wondering if it was a lawyer or worse, someone from Emily's new life trying to find a loophole to drag us back into her mess. But life had a way of moving forward. The days turned into weeks, and Michael began adjusting better. His smile was returning, genuine, unguarded. It made all the difference. I focused on him, not her. We had dinners together, went to the park, and sometimes just stayed in, watching movies. I found peace in the simplicity of our routine. It was late one evening when I got the call. I recognized the number instantly. It was from a lawyer, one of Emily's old associates. His name was Mark Tanner, and we had crossed paths during the divorce proceedings. I hesitated, but answered. "Daniel Watson?" he asked, his voice calm but with an undertone of tension. "Yes. What is this about?" I kept it short, businesslike. No need for pleasantries. "I represent Emily Watson. She's requesting a modification to the custody arrangement," he said, his words crisp. "She's filed a motion to regain visitation rights, and she's asking for a more substantial role in Michael's life." I was silent for a moment. I had expected this. I'd known it was coming. But hearing the words out loud, hearing the calculated tone in his voice, hit harder than I anticipated. "You're going to need to prove her unfit again, Daniel," Tanner continued. "She's hired a new team, and they're more than willing to make this a long fight." I inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. She's the one who ruined her own life. If she thinks she can waltz back into Michael's world like nothing happened, she's wrong. Mark was quiet for a beat, then said, "We'll see you in court, then." I spent the next few days stewing. Emily had made her move, and now I had to decide how I would counter it. But this time, it wasn't just about winning. It was about protecting Michael and making sure that he didn't end up caught in the crossfire of her drama. I called Jack. "We're going back to court," I said, getting straight to the point. "She's trying to play this like a game, but it's not. I'm not letting her drag Michael into her mess again." Jack's voice was sharp. "No nonsense. I know you're pissed, Daniel. But we need to play this carefully. Emily has resources now, and she's been strategizing for months. We need to stay ahead of her." "I'm not interested in playing her game," I snapped. "I'm done being strategic. I just want her to leave us alone." Jack paused, then said, "That's exactly why we need to be strategic. Emotion's not going to win this one. You've already proven you can beat her legally, but you've got to think ahead. Don't let her control the narrative." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The legal team I assembled worked tirelessly, sifting through old evidence, looking for ways to solidify the argument that Emily was an unfit parent. We dug into her past, combed through her records, and I even brought up the fact that her latest attempt to re-enter acting could disrupt the stability I'd worked so hard to give Michael. But even as the strategy unfolded, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that Emily wasn't just fighting for visitation. She was trying to take back what she'd lost. She was trying to reassert control, not just over Michael, but over me. And that was something I couldn't allow. A few days before the court date, I found myself sitting across from Jack in a downtown cafe, reviewing our plan one last time. "Are we ready?" I asked, my hands clenched around the cup, the weight of what was coming bearing down on me. "We've got everything we need," Jack said, leaning forward. "But remember, this is your son's future, Daniel. We're not just fighting for visitation rights. We're fighting for his stability, his peace of mind. Don't let her drag us back into her world." I met his gaze, and for a split second, I felt a weight settle in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for a victory, not anymore. I was fighting for the life I wanted to give Michael. A life without the chaos of his mother's mistakes. A life free of her influence. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom felt cold, sterile. Emily was there, her face carefully composed, her lawyer sitting beside her, ready to take on whatever came next. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for redemption, for the chance to rewrite the narrative of her life. I couldn't afford to let her. The hearing was tense. Emily's lawyer laid out their case, painting her as a changed woman, one who had learned from her mistakes and was now ready to be a mother again. But I could see the cracks in the story. I knew what she had done. I knew the damage she had caused. And I wasn't going to let her walk away without paying the price. The courtroom felt suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat at the table, watching Emily. Her eyes never met mine. She looked composed, but I could tell she was jittery beneath the surface. She always had been. Emily was never good at holding her ground when she knew she was in the wrong. She played the part of the perfect mother, but I knew the truth. Her lawyer, a smooth-talking man in a tailored suit, was doing everything he could to sell the story that Emily had changed, that her life was in order now, that she could provide for Michael better than I could. But I wasn't listening to him. I was focused on Emily, watching her every move, every flicker in her eyes. The judge was flipping through documents, clearly uninterested in the theatrics unfolding before him. Emily's side had made their pitch. Now it was time for mine. I stood, straightened my tie, and walked up to the witness stand. The sound of my shoes against the polished floor was oddly loud in the silence. I didn't make eye contact with Emily. That would be a mistake. Instead, I focused on the judge, on the process, on what needed to be said. "My name is Daniel Watson," I began, my voice steady, controlled. "I am Michael Watson's father, and I'm here today because I believe his best interests are with me." Emily Watson, despite her efforts to appear stable, has shown over and over again that she is unfit to care for our son. I continued. "Since the day Michael was born, Emily has made decisions that have impacted his well-being, his emotional health, and his stability. Her actions have been erratic, irresponsible, and most of all, selfish. She sought out a life for herself, one that didn't include our son, and now she's asking for another chance at something she has already abandoned." The words were cutting, and I could feel Emily's gaze shift towards me. But I didn't care. She had hurt me. She had betrayed me in ways that were unforgivable. And now she wanted to pretend she could just step back into our lives without consequences. I paused, allowing the silence to settle, before continuing. "I'm not here to punish Emily. I'm here to protect my son. Michael needs stability. He needs to feel safe. And I'm the only one who can give him that." There was no more room for softness. No more room for empathy. Emily had burned through that a long time ago. This was a fight for Michael's future, and I wasn't going to lose it. The next few hours were a blur of cross-examination, objections, and counter-arguments. Emily's lawyer tried to discredit my words, tried to paint me as a controlling, vengeful man. But I had prepared for this. I had everything lined up: evidence, testimony, and a solid case that Emily's behavior had harmed our family. The truth was on my side. When Emily was called to the stand, I couldn't help but notice how she carried herself. She was calm, but her eyes betrayed her. She was holding back something. Maybe fear, maybe guilt. She was trying to sell a story that didn't add up. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to crack. Her lawyer asked her all the right questions, and Emily answered with practiced ease, explaining how she had learned from her mistakes, how she was now a changed woman. But I could see it in her eyes. There was no sincerity in her words. I stood up, and the room grew quiet. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "I would like to submit a piece of evidence." I passed a folder to the judge, who opened it and skimmed the contents. Inside were emails, messages, and photos, all evidence that Emily had been in contact with Jason Hart long after the divorce proceedings began. She had claimed to be moving on, but the reality was that she was still entangled in the same mess that had torn our family apart. The judge looked up from the papers, his expression unreadable. Emily's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but I could see the crack in their armor. They hadn't anticipated this. "I've also got records of Emily's recent attempts to re-enter the acting industry," I continued, my gaze fixed on Emily. "Her actions are not about redemption or being a better mother. They're about reclaiming the fame and fortune she lost. The truth is, she's not interested in Michael's well-being. She's interested in herself." Emily's face flushed. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She couldn't defend herself against the evidence. She couldn't argue with the facts. The hearing wrapped up shortly after that. The judge asked for a recess, and I left the courtroom with a quiet confidence that only came from knowing I had done everything right. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting Michael. And no matter what, I wouldn't let her take him away from me. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind was still racing, still turning over every moment of the hearing, every word that had been said. But I wasn't worried anymore. I had done everything I could. I had exposed her for who she truly was, and I had made sure Michael was going to be safe. The next morning, I got the call from Jack. "We won," he said, his voice almost flat. "The judge granted full custody to you. Emily's visitation rights are restricted." I didn't know what to say at first. A weight I didn't realize I was carrying lifted off my shoulders. But there was no elation, no celebration, just a quiet sense of finality. Emily had lost, and Michael was safe. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.